Hello, and welcome to the SMU Archive series. In this series, we interview members of the SMU community who can provide insight into the history of SMU, especially from the perspective of their time at the university. I'm Carter Murphy, and today we have with us SMU alumna Sarah McGrath. Sarah was an undergraduate at SMU and then a graduate student in two different departments and two different schools. And she's the widow of Dr. Barney McGrath, who was professor and founder of the Department of Film Arts. Sarah, it's nice to have you here. And what was SMU like when you came in the mid-1930s?
Carter, you wouldn't believe it. Of course, we didn't have air conditioning, and it was a hot September day. And there were about a dozen buildings on the campus, give or take a shack now and then, like the Art Shack.
And what was the Art Shack, if I may ask?
The Art Shack was a little frame building behind Dallas Hall, along with a little red brick building that housed, what do you call it when you look at the stars? Anyway.
The astronomy.
An astronomy, yes. And but the main building was then, as it is now, Dallas Hall. Dominated the campus, beautiful, big, all over the place, and it did set the style for the rest of the campus architecture. The campus was divided into two halves, the north half and the south half. And as I say, there was Dallas Hall in the north half, and then there was McFarland, and Kirby Hall, and Higher Hall.
Kirby Hall then was not Kirby Hall now, for now Kirby Hall is down in the theological complex.
Exactly. And it was the theological school then. There was no complex, just Kirby Hall. And now it's the location of it is included in the law school quadrangle today. And let's see, there was the co-op. That was a very important location. It was one story of what is now the administration building. And in it we had the post office, the sandwich shop, where you paid your bills to enter school. I guess a few administration offices. I don't know where the others were. And but the center of social life was the co-op, where we who lived on campus met to get our mail every day, and then we went into the sandwich shop to have lunch and meet friends and make plans for the weekend dates and all that sort of thing.
It was the student union and the critical place for mixing, yeah.
Exactly, Even if you didn't think you had any mail, you went to the co-op to see who was there.
Now the buildings then that faced on the North Campus, as you call it, besides Dallas Hall, there was the co-op, there was the Kirby building, housing theology, and what else?
Did I mention McFarland?
No, McFarland Auditorium.
And then there was Higher Hall, where most of the science department was in the Higher Hall, and Atkins Hall, which was the boys' dormitory, and also included, I think, journalism, I'm not sure, and some publications. But there was a quadrangle. There was a picture, this thing, a fountain right in the middle. It's still there, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed. A beautiful fountain.
And with sidewalks leading out to each of the buildings.
Well, that was a kind of piece of architecture for the early campus that has remained the stable thing, I think, in the quadrangle, it and Dallas Hall over many, many years now. What about the south half of the campus?
Well, the south half included Snyder and Virginia Hall. I lived in Snyder Hall, the girls' dorms. The girls' gym, the boys' gym. The girls' gym was brick and the boys' gym was shack. But it had the swimming pool in it.
Where were they located?
Well, they were located
at the location of the modern natatorium?
And the business school.
And the business school.
Then, of course, there was Ownby Stadium, where most of SMU's big action took place there, the football games.
Yes.
And across from that was Highland Park Methodist Church. And most of particularly the people who lived on campus, were from Methodist families, and that was church home. And then between the church and Snyder and Virginia Hall was a great grassy field. And at the church end of it was a grove of trees, and we call that Arden Forest, and used to have little picnics down there, the campus students.
Was given the name Arden Forest, reminds one of Shakespeare. Was Shakespeare ever produced there in the summer or the winter?
Shakespeare was. That was before my time, but Shakespeare was pretty big here when I came.
Well, it must have been a lovely setting. What was campus life like?
Campus life. Well, in my particular case, I was part of the music school, and I didn't know anybody when I came, one person from my hometown. We had rush week before school started then, and I did go through rush, and I pledged Tridel, and started making new friends that way. And I made friends in the music school and in the dormitory. So I had three sources of friendships. But the social life was mostly the dances on the weekend. And since we couldn't dance on campus, we had our dances downtown at the hotel or the Dallas Country Club.
That sounds pretty fancy.
It was fancy. Gloves,
Were they?
flowers.
They were not. There was no dancing on campus because of religious strictures.
I think so. Also, no plays.
Just as there was no drinking on campus for many, many, many years.
Or smoking,
And
except for men.
Men were
I
allowed.
spent 2 or 3 weekends being what you call campused for smoking on campus. I was kind of rebellious about that idea.
And what about, there were other restrictions on women. I suppose there was a curfew at the dormitories.
We had very strict parietals.
Yes.
We had, freshmen got 2 nights a week out to have a date and be in by 11 o'clock. On Saturday, 12 o'clock. And if you were lucky, you made good friends in your sorority and spent the weekend on the big dance nights with the friend off campus. Then each year you got an extra night if you made your grades. By the time you were a senior, you could go out any time you wanted to. And that night, I mean, up
Yes.
until 11, I mean.
But it was an earned privilege. I remember well how couples gathered outside the women's dormitories at the time when the women had to return at curfew hour. Was there chapel, mandatory chapel?
Oh, you bet. Every Wednesday, it was in McFarland. I forgot to say what all happened in the various buildings on campus at that time, but McFarland was the place for all convocations, and it housed the music school. And the little tiny rooms in the basement around different places were practice rooms. And every Wednesday from 11 to 12, all classes had been shortened by 15 minutes and to crowd in a mandatory chapel hour then.
And you were a music major, is that correct?
Yes, I started out to major in piano, but I had small hands, or still have them too, and not that much talent for instrumental music. And I had a wonderful, wonderful teacher, Dr. Paul Van Catwick. And after a year or two, including a time when a friend, Craig Timberlake, came into my practice room and sight read Beethoven's sonata that I'd been working on for all year, better than I played it.
Isn't that discouraging?
I began to think maybe I should go into some other part of music.
I've often had that feeling just walking through a library and seeing all the books I haven't read and never shall. It's very frustrating. But you have sung all of your life. You must have done vocal work even as an undergraduate.
Did. I switched my major not to voice but to public school music. My grandmother was a Welsh contralto in a Welsh coal mining town.
Yes.
And my mother's, that was on my father's side, my mother's family were all quite musical, to the extent that anytime we get together for family reunions, we break up into a little barbershop quartet type thing. Harmonize. I can do that.
Sounds
And my
lovely.
sister came to school at that time, and she and I, we had a little pet name for each, or people did for us, the Chicken Sisters. We could cluck the song, the French song, Sous la bra. So we were
Yes.
the Chicken Sisters. And her roommate, though, was an opera major, marvelous voice. So we let her join our group, and we're a performing trio, and we performed without mic and amplification.
That trio was called the Chicken, the Clucking Group, or whatever it was.
The Chicken Sisters.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you meet Barney?
Oh, that was the high spot in my whole career in the school. We had an opera every year, and this particular year it was Robin Hood. And Barney, having just graduated from the Arts and Sciences School, majoring in theater and speech, had donated his services to the production of Robin Hood. And he came around to help me with my makeup. Well, I was thrilled, because Barney was a big man on campus. I always wanted to be, but I never was a big man on campus, especially like Barney.
Mm-hmm.
He was a cheerleader in the Rose Bowl game.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the student council. He was president of Arden Club. Whatever it was, if he entered it, he did it. And he was friendly and very good looking. So I just never did let go.
He was a catch. And how long did Barney court you before this led to something else?
Let's see. We met in the spring of my junior year, and married right at the beginning of World War II, or right before World War II, in June of 41.
So you had graduated by then, I
Yes,
think.
we both had.
Uh-huh. And you were married on campus, I think you told me one time.
Well, actually, my father had died that year, and we were married in Marshall Steele's study at the Highland Park
And
Church.
Marshall Steele was
Minister
whom?
of Highland Park Church.
He was. Mm-hmm.
That's a name that other folks in my grade year will remember.
Yes. And you were, at that point, at some point you studied English.
Oh, yes. I stayed in town a fifth year after I graduated in order to get a teaching certificate and to start an English degree, but mostly to be where Barney was.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us anything about the English department in those years?
Well, it took me quite a while to get the English degree, because after that, I just went, when Barney went to graduate school, I went along and took English courses, so I didn't have just SMU department people. For instance, at the University of Wisconsin, I had S.I. Hayakawa and Harry Hayden Clark, two pretty well known names in the Northwest. At SMU, I had Henry Nash Smith and Dr. McGinnis, and then later Larry Perrine, just about my favorite of all good teachers that ever were.
Yes, everywhere. Larry would make us
Larry
be careful
wouldn't
about
put up with that, would he?
Let me see. What about going back to the School of Music? Now, the School of Music was organized as an individual school at that point.
It was
And
one of the schools
Barney's
of the
department
college.
of theater, for example, speech and theater, was it associated with the School of Music?
No, it was part of the Arts and Sciences School until the Meadows complex developed, and there were several big donations, of course, to get that started. It now, of course, is a complex too, but it took schools, it took the arts from Arts and Sciences and the whole music school and the speech and theater from Arts and Sciences, put them all together, and then journalism.
But speech and theater was part of liberal arts, and was debate an important part of a speech program at that
Debate
point?
was, and Norma Stanton, she is now, was the debate coach, excellent coach, lots of winners.
Now, but at last you and Barney were married then in Steele's office at Highland Park Methodist Church. And then, well, when did Barney join the faculty of SMU? Soon thereafter?
All right, 10 years after he entered as a freshman, he came back as a faculty instructor. He had served his time in the Air Force and of World War II, and the GI Bill was the big thing then. And SMU called him and said, "We are desperate, we're inundated with students," and most other colleges were too, and universities. And if you will come back, if you will come back and teach for us, we will make it so that if you use your own GI Bill and go to school every summer, you can be part of the faculty. And that's what we did. And for 3 summers, we went to the University of Wisconsin, and we met some very interesting people there. I mentioned Dr. Hayakawa.
Now, Dr. Hayakawa was later president of the University of San Francisco, I remember.
Yes.
At the time, there were student problems in the 1960s.
And then senator from California.
And then senator, you're quite correct.
And we remained good friends as long as he lived, because he came to Dallas once and called Barney and said, "I know you can do something with my voice, and I have one of those inscrutable Oriental voices. Please enlarge it for me." He came by and spent the weekend, and Barney gave him a few voice lessons, and he walked out with a great big new voice. We were friends ever after that, and when we were in California, we always visited him and his wife.
That's a good story. But then Barney was a member of the SMU faculty. You were a faculty wife then, but your summers were all in graduate school. Did Barney finish his degree at Wisconsin?
Oh, yes. He got his master's at Wisconsin and decided to start his doctorate at Stanford. So we went to Stanford for a semester, the summer semester, quartermaster they called it then. And he found that he couldn't get television work there and would have to transfer he settled on Columbia because New York City was the hub of everything then.
So he became interested in television as a medium for his interest in speech and theater at an early time.
That evolved out of an earlier interest in radio. His master's thesis had to do with some radio programming, but as he worked with that, he could see that television was the big thing, and he wanted to be part of it.
And his doctoral dissertation was on some aspect of television production?
Yes, it was. It was a plan for using television as a way of enhancing, how shall I put it? Equality, racial equality and fairness.
Now, to finish his degree at Columbia, I presume he had to spend some time in residence.
Yes,
so
he
you
did.
had to leave SMU.
Yes, he did. We waited until our first child was born because I didn't especially want to have a baby in New York City. I don't know why, I've always been a little afraid of New York. So the next year we went, we were there a year and a half, We had some wonderful opportunities and experiences, and saw all of New York City. We found a woman that wanted to babysit our child who was born. My first child was born before we went up there. And also a grandfather who wanted to foot the bills for his grandson's babysitting. We went to a play every Saturday night that we were there just about.
What a nice parental gift.
And in the summer we went to Jones Beach.
Of course. Everybody in New York did, I think.
Everybody
didn't they?
did. We went on Wednesdays because everybody else went on Saturday.
Uh-huh. And you spent then one academic year at Columbia.
Right.
Uh-huh. And then soon after that, Barney finished his degree, and you returned to SMU.
Yes. We, there was a lapse of time before he got his degree between the residency and getting the degree.
Yes.
And during that period of time, he took on an extra assignment and taught homiletics at Perkins Theology School, which by now was not Kirby Hall anymore, but a big complex down where Arden Forest had been. And we met many wonderful people we would not have known if we hadn't.
Who was dean of the Perkins School at that time?
Merriman Cunningham.
Yes,
And he was a wonderful, wonderful person to work with. As a matter of fact, I taught one non-credit course in grammar for Merriman Cunningham. He was as great as Larry Perrine.
I'm glad we have a generation of preachers whose grammar is good.
Good.
And whose elocution must be good as a result of Barney's instruction. Sarah, you were involved, I know, because of my own wife's involvement, in the SMU Women's Club.
Oh, of course.
Do you know when it began and how it developed?
Well, a little bit. It had begun and was developed when I got here in 1946. And it had been here when I was a student 10 years previously, because I had known and been friends of some of the faculty children whose mothers were in University Women's Club. The club met, I'm thinking we met in the business school. The Fincher parlors were donated with some interest toward letting the University Women's Club use these parlors as for their meetings. And somewhere along the line, the school found other uses for it. And after that, we drifted around from one place to another, and we meet now in the faculty club. And I've been a member for 55 years. And I've had every office except treasurer, and I knew what I was doing when I said no to that. That's a hard, wonderful job that somebody does.
Now, the Women's Club has a number of sections, doesn't it? Special interest sections, I suppose?
Yes, IGs, interest groups, and they change from time to time. But in order to be in one, you have to keep your membership in the main group. With a year that I was president, I realized that nobody owed me any favors, and I had to get some close friends quick. So my job before that had been as sort of sponsor of the interest groups, and I had observed where all the workers were. So I joined that one immediately. Had a year to work on friendships. So when I had the appointive power, there'd be somebody to say yes. I enjoy that very much.
I was thinking of the Fincher parlors. They no longer exist as such, but when Mrs. Fincher gave money for that building, she left, I remember, her beautiful carpets and some antiques and lovely objects d'art to decorate that room. And it was a lovely parlor for meetings of that sort for many years, until it was demolished to make room for a dean's office.
Yes.
Under the deanship of Jack Grayson, I think.
Yes.
And then, as you say, it was no longer available for general meetings. Let's turn to to Barney's role in the Department of Broadcast Film.
Oh,
Barney really founded that department, I think, and probably at the time the Meadows School was created.
yes. In 1960, Barney was made a full professor with tenure and chairman of the Broadcast Film Department, a new department, and he was given the opportunity to pick faculty one at a time. And so his first pick was Bill Jones, and his second pick was Ted Gardner, and it went on from there.
Bill Jones is perhaps most popularly known around this campus and in the city for the film archives, for which I guess he was primarily responsible, though Barney may have had a hand in that as well.
Actually, it was Bill. That was his thing. That and the USA Film Festival. For 10 years, the department chaired the USA Film Festival, meaning as opposed from the Cannes Festival or some outside, and it did not, I don't think we invited foreign films. It was just American films. And it was a great experience. It was a lot of work. There was the festival board, which Barney and I were on by virtue of his being chairman of the department. We had some very good times. Once when one of our members was Carr Collins Jr., one of our board members, who was a banker in Jefferson, Texas, and has one of the old Jefferson show homes. So he engaged the hotel there, the Excelsior.
Yes.
And for the whole film festival group, the board. And we went down there for a glorious weekend, a banquet and a cocktail party here and something else there, and saw the whole town, and really had a good time. And in addition to that, of course, we met all these film personalities who had been famous film stars when I was a student. I can't even start naming any, but one I particularly remember, though, is Joan Fontaine, because somebody was assigned to take care of each one, and the student that was taking care of her, she didn't like the way he drove, and they asked me to be her driver, and certainly I'd love that. Well, we had a very good visit together, and she told me that her daughter was, I told her that my son was interested in film, and her daughter was. And then about that time, our son, who was a student in Meadows School at that time, Jim McGrath, he now is a film television writer in Los Angeles. But he came up, and I introduced them, and she said, "Is this the film buff?" Well, he thought that was pretty keen for Joan Fontaine to know who he was.
Yes, indeed.
And so did I.
Is the USA Film Festival, does it still take place on this campus?
No, it doesn't. After the department had had it for about a year, and I say it was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun, and it was a lot. But Kermit Hunter was dean of the Meadows, and he decided it was time to give the festival to Dallas, which he did, and it still operates as the USA Film Festival. I get invited every year, but it's kind of tiring at my age. I can't sit all day in a film house now.
What were the facilities of broadcast film at that time?
Well, I thought the TV studio, I don't know a great deal about broadcast film, but I thought the TV studio was pretty wonderful. It was in the beginning there wasn't anything. There was the TV shack, which was another one of those famous, now you see it, now you don't, buildings on campus. And then they used WFAA television facilities at night because WFAA went on to the networks. And that reminds me that two of Barney's best students were Ward Huey and Mimi Powell. And Ward later became chairman of WFAA, and his most recent activity was on his retirement in April of this year. He was a spokesman for the Below Foundation in giving $5 million to SMU for a new journalism and broadcast department.
Well, that's a splendid legacy to leave to this university. Barney did some textbook writing.
Yes, he
while
co-authored 2 textbooks back at a time when publishing companies sent representatives to the college to say, hey, we want you to write a book. And they did that twice, and he got in. McGraw-Hill was his publisher. But then
The
when he
biggest and best.
retired, he wrote another text, which I've given to Ward Huey for the archives, which they were not so eager to publish because it didn't reach out to enough people. It was on how to be an anchorman.
Well, that's big business
It's big business.
here in the 21st century. And then Barney retired. I don't remember the year.
91. I remember it because that was also the year of our 50th anniversary. Well, he was retired. He was mandatorily retired in 73 as the,
That was-
83 as the
That was
department chairman.
because of the age of
He was
65.
the last of the mandatorily retired professors.
People who reached 65
Uh-huh.
before federal legislation changed all that.
And he really didn't want to, but what can you do? He went on teaching for 5 or 6 years.
So he retired in name, but
Well,
but
he was
not
no
in-
longer chairman of
not
the
in-
department.
Not in action. We talked a little bit, Sarah, about Apogee, which was an investment club that still exists and still is very active indeed in as an investment medium for many people on the faculty.
Yes.
You became involved in that at an early
Yes,
point.
I did. I did. When our sons, Mike and Jim, went away to college, and I had the empty nest syndrome. And Barney said, I know what you're going to do. You're going to business school. The boys and I are not greatly interested in investments, and you are, so go and learn how. And after I went to business school, I decided I wanted to be in the faculty investment club and to learn what they knew, but also to share what I knew, because I hadn't known any of it before I went to business school. And I've enjoyed that group very much. It was originally founded in the 60s by some engineers and some physicists and chemists. And now we have tried to make it open to anybody on campus who would like to learn more about investing and find some good friends. We meet every Tuesday and at the faculty club, as long as it
We'll have you.
keeps operating. And we're called the steering committee, and anybody in the club is welcome.
In the School of Business, with whom did you study?
Don Jackson, mostly, and Phil Ladwick,
a
who
great
was
teacher
an
by
adjunct
reputation.
professor. What?
A great teacher by reputation.
Oh, yes. I think he may teach one course now, I'm not sure. He sponsors a group of which Marion Tate is a member, and I think it's the President's Wives Club. I'm not a member.
Let me see, Sarah. It's been a long time then since you first came and joined the SMU community, and you have seen it from many, many dimensions. Any other comments you would like to make about the evolution of SMU over this more than half a century?
Well, it staggers the mind how it's grown from an intimate little smallish college to being, I think, one of the really fine private schools in the United States. And as a matter of fact, I do have one more thing I'd like to say, and that is that Mike and Jim and I have joined the Dallas Hall Society in presenting a memorial to Barney, because SMU was so much of his life and his devotion.
Well, in that way and many others, he lives on then as part of this university, Sarah. I've been talking to Sarah McGrath, who's an alumna of SMU, and it has been a pleasure to talk to her about those days in SMU and the long period she's been associated with speech and theater and broadcast film. Thank you, Sarah, for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Carter.